Welcome to this 5-minute presentation on the Archaeology and Planning Case Studies project. I'm Jan Wills and I'll be talking about research that Stuart Bryant and I carried out to gather hard information to support CIFA's advocacy work on archaeology and planning. The impact of development on archaeological sites or heritage assets with archaeological interest, as they're described in planning policy, is managed through a staged decision-making process. Desk-based assessment and field evaluations supply information on the impact of development. Planning conditions are used to secure programmes of archaeological investigation and analysis through to publication and archiving. Essential elements in this process include the evaluation, the ability to use pre-commencement planning conditions, the enforcement of planning conditions if things go wrong, typically if post-excavation is not proceeded with, and the availability of specialist archaeological advice from local authority staff to guide the whole process. All of these aspects of the system have been proposed for change over the last few years, or jeopardised by reductions in local authority staff capacity. To provide evidence of why these aspects of policy and process are essential, we collected 117 archaeology and planning case studies that illustrate that the system can work well to manage the impact of development on heritage assets and deliver public benefit. They show what can happen when policy is not implemented or when the right advice is not available. And they show, therefore, why they need to be retained in the future as the planning system changes. The case studies look at 4 aspects of the system: predetermination evaluation, the use of archaeological planning conditions, enforcement of those conditions when things go wrong, and the availability of specialist archaeological advice in local authorities. Here are a few examples of case studies from the project. My first case study is an urban one from Gloucester City, which illustrates the effective use of archaeological evaluation predetermination. It's a complex urban site that had had a lot of post-medieval and modern development. It was proposed for comprehensive redevelopment, and it was the known site of Gloucester's second medieval castle, but with uncertain levels of survival of the medieval remains. The evaluation found structural remains of the medieval castle keep just below the surface, essential information to enable a redevelopment package to be designed that would protect the medieval structures, but also enable redevelopment and regeneration of the site to proceed. My second rural example is from Tame in Oxfordshire and illustrates the use of pre-commencement archaeological planning conditions. Evaluation on this site had discovered an important sequence of earlier prehistoric to medieval evidence on a site where very little was known prior to the evaluation. The use of a pre-commencement condition enabled large-scale excavation of this sequence, including of a new Neolithic causewayed enclosure. On the screen you can see the enclosure being excavated, as well as a topographical model of its location, bottom left, and bottom right, one of the Iron Age pit burials being excavated. I want to touch briefly on 2 other themes covered by the Case Studies project. Firstly, the enforcement of archaeological planning conditions. Most programmes of archaeological work secured by a planning condition go smoothly through to completion. If they don't, then the local planning authority may need to follow this up with the developer and take legal enforcement action to ensure that the work, typically outstanding post-excavation, is completed. Amongst the case studies, you can find 11 examples of local authorities taking this enforcement action to enable projects to be completed, showing that conditions need to remain in force until projects are fully complete. Secondly, it's vital that local planning authorities have access to specialist archaeological advice. The case studies include 9 good examples of planning authorities which didn't have that specialist advice or didn't use it, resulting in, for example, a lack of evaluation, or a failure to require archaeological investigation, and poor outcomes therefore for heritage, but also for the developer, since projects were often disrupted by the late discovery of archaeological sites once development was already underway. The case studies project is now complete, and the research material is available on the CIFA website. The project report contains information on recent changes to the planning system, an analysis of the case studies looking at how planning policy affecting heritage assets is being implemented, and a summary of each case study with details of the archaeological and planning processes and outcomes. We've recently added a searchable database, so you can now find specific examples of the themes that I've been talking about. The advocacy message from the project is that the system can work well to manage the impact of development on heritage assets, and the key policies and processes examined by the project therefore need to be retained in the future as the planning system changes. You can find the project report and the case studies database on the CIFA website at the address on the screen. Thank you.